you hear good things.
It was the kind of bedroom that never cooled down in the summer. Just sticky air pressing against skin. No breeze, no peace. A mattress pushed against one wall. Clothes scattered on the floor. The bitter after smell of cigarettes and motor oil still clinging to the walls. Jerry Lynn Dean was asleep, or close to it. Sweating through the sheets, his boots still half on. The noise of the street outside replaced by the kind of stillness that tells you it's already too late. He didn't hear the door open, didn't hear the footsteps cross the carpet. Maybe there was a second where his body tensed, confused, sensing something, someone. But by then, she was already standing over him. Karla Faye Tucker wasn't supposed to be there to kill anyone. That's what she'd later say. She was high, wired, wild, and dangerous in a way that didn't look dangerous. In one hand, she held a pickaxe. In the other, the anger she'd been trying to bury under speed, sweat, and approval for years. She said the first swing was clumsy, that she didn't think it would go in that far. But it did. And she didn't stop. As Jerry thrashed beneath her, she kept going, over and over, until the movement stopped, until the sound in the room wasn't breathing or struggling or begging. It was just metal and silence. By the time Deborah Thornton walked into the room, it was already too late. She hadn't screamed yet. She hadn't run. She'd come looking for a friend and stepped into a scene she couldn't understand. There was blood on the walls, blood on the sheets, and Karla laughing. Not wild or unhinged, not screaming or sobbing. Laughing quietly, calm, focused. And when Karla turned to her, something shifted in her eyes. There wasn't rage there. There was purpose. She grabbed the pickaxe with both hands. And Deborah was next. What happened to Deborah can't be summarized. It can only be measured in punctures, in broken ribs, in the number of times her name was later left out of the headlines. Karla would later say she had an orgasm every time she drove the pickaxe down. That's right, an orgasm. And then she'd say she found God, that she wasn't that person anymore, that the woman who walked into that room with a weapon and a high and no conscience died years ago in a prison cell. But the story doesn't end there, because Karla Faye Tucker didn't just kill two people. She split a country down the middle. She made people ask questions they didn't want the answers to, about redemption, about justice. And what do we do when the person begging for mercy already took away someone else's last breath? I'm Sidney Smith, and this is Murderous Podcast. And this week's Murderous is Karla Faye Tucker in episode 87, The Woman with the Pickaxe. Before Karla Faye Tucker became the face of death row redemption, before the pickaxe and the prison and the televised pleas for mercy, She was just a little girl sitting backstage at a strip club, waiting for her mother to finish work. She was born in 1959 in Houston, Texas, the youngest of three daughters. Her father, Larry, was a construction worker who drank hard and drifted in and out of the house like a ghost. Her mother, Carolyn, was louder, sharp-tongued, chain-smoking, fast-moving, and she made her living the only way she felt she could: dancing, stripping, doing what it took to feed three daughters in a world that didn't offer her much else. By the time Karla was 8, she was already being passed around to relatives, watching her parents' marriage dissolve in slow motion. By 10, she was experimenting with drugs: weed first, then pills, then whatever her older sisters or her mother's boyfriends left behind. By 12, she was shooting heroin, not sneaking it, not trying it, shooting it. Karla didn't grow up. She survived. When her parents divorced, she chose to stay with her mother. Carolyn was the fun one, the one who never told her no, who didn't care if she drank, who let her wear eyeliner and heels to middle school. They were more like sisters than mother and daughter. And by 14, they were working the same strip clubs. Karla learned how to charm from the stage, how to perform that whole sense of vulnerability, how to disarm men with a giggle, how to make her own pain invisible. She moved through the world with a kind of reckless confidence, showing up to a biker rallies, hanging out with rough men twice her age, betting them, fighting them, needing them. There was no school, no future, no plan. By the time she was 16, Karla had tried rehab. She'd tried detox. She'd even tried prayer. But what was always won out was the high, the need to leave her body, to escape the screaming silence of her childhood. People who knew her would say she was magnetic, not the kind of magnetic you admire from afar, but the kind that pulls you closer before you even realize you stepped into something dangerous. One friend said, "You didn't just notice Karla, you locked onto her. Her laugh could fill a room, and the next second she'd be crying on your shoulder. You never knew which version of her you were going to get, and that's why people stayed." She had big, dark eyes and a crooked smile that made her look younger than she was and softer than she really was. She could switch from flirt to fighter in a heartbeat. One biker told a reporter years later, "There were prettier girls in the room, but none of them had her fire." She was a little wild. She was a little broken and beautiful in the way danger sometimes is. She had a thing for musicians, speed freaks, and men with knives, which is how she ended up with Danny Garrett, a drug dealer and motorcycle thief who was as impulsive as he was controlling. Their relationship was built on chemicals and chaos, sex, violence, meth, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't mean love. It means survival. They lived out of hotel rooms and borrowed apartments. She rode on the back of his bike with her hair flying in the wind, eyes dilated, blood still buzzing from the night before. Karla didn't have a line between right and wrong. She had lines between high and low, between useful and discarded, between being the one who got hurt and being the one who hurt someone else first. By 23, she was already in deep, addicted, paranoid, reckless. And one night, she and Danny came up with a plan. Steal a motorcycle, get in, get out, easy. But when they walked into Jerry Dean's apartment, it didn't feel like a robbery. It felt like release. Like everything Karla has swallowed since she was a child came roaring out in the form of a swing. She said it was the drugs. She said it was Danny. She said it wasn't her. But the truth is, the woman who raised herself in the back room of a strip club didn't die when Karla hit her 20s. She just learned how to smile when she picked up the weapon. By the summer of 1983, Karla Faye Tucker had been on a binge for days. She and Danny Garrett were living in a haze of meth, downers, and cigarettes, hopping between apartments, crashing with friends, trading stolen goods for dope. There was no sleep, no food, just adrenaline and a shared obsession with the next high. They hadn't eaten in 2 days. The apartment they were staying in reeked of sweat and gasoline. Motorcycle parts on the floor, ashtrays overflowing, the windows shut tight even though the Texas heat made it feel like breathing through a wet towel. Karla and Danny were running out of drugs and out of cash. So they came up with a plan. Something simple. Jerry Dean. He was a mechanic, known for bragging about his Harley. He liked to talk a little too loud. They knew where he lived, knew he had the bike inside, and they knew he kept the keys close by. They figured they could walk in, grab what they needed, and be gone before the sunrise. No one was supposed to die. But Karla hadn't been thinking clearly for a long time. Neither had Danny. They were both wired, amped up, and numb at the same time. And Karla? She was tired of being small. Tired of being used. Tired of being high and still feeling low. When they left that apartment, Karla grabbed something from the garage. A pickaxe. Heavy. Rusted. Two-handed. She said it was for protection, but that's not how she held it. They arrived at Jerry Dean's place just after 3 a.m. The street was quiet. Just street lamps buzzing. A few cars scattered along the curb. They knew he'd be home, knew he'd be asleep. Karla walked in through the back, barefoot. Danny had already picked the lock. Inside, the place was dark, but still warm with the weight of sleep. The kind of silence you only get in the middle of the night. Thick, private, undisturbed. Jerry was in bed. Not dead, not waking up, just somewhere in between. Danny went for the bike. Karla went for the bedroom. She later said she didn't even know what made her do it. Karla said she wasn't thinking when she walked into the bedroom, just reacting. Her body was wired, overstimulated, everything louder and sharper from days of no sleep. Her thoughts fraying around the edges like a cassette tape that's been played too many times. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching Jerry sleeping with his mouth slightly open, the fan above him wobbling as it spun. The light from the hallway was just enough to see the outline of his chest rise and fall beneath the sheet. She said she didn't even remember deciding to raise the pickaxe. 1 second, she was standing still. The next, she was in motion. The first blow landed somewhere near his shoulder, but the angle wasn't clean. He woke up in the middle of it, jerking, eyes wide and confused. She swung again. This time, it caught him in the neck, deep and hard. A spray of blood hit the wall. He tried to scream, but what came out wasn't a scream. It was a wet, gurgling choke, like someone trying to speak through water. He thrashed. But the room was small, the bed boxed him in, and Karla didn't stop. She was making sounds too. Not screams, not cries. She was laughing. Not wild, high-pitched laughter. Something else. Something low. Delighted. She swung again. Felt a jolt in her shoulders as the axe sank deeper. And that's when she said it started. The sensation. She described it in court like she was remembering a dream. Not proudly, but without shame. She said, I had an orgasm every time I hit him. I didn't plan that. It just happened. And you heard me right. She said she had an orgasm every time she struck him with that pickaxe. The courtroom froze when she said it. Even the reporters looked up from their pads. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them. Calm. Honest. No effort to manipulate. No need to justify. Just fact. She said it like someone explaining the weather. This is what happened to my body while I took someone's life. She told the jury she didn't understand it either. That the rush came from deep inside her chest, spread down her arms, and curled into her stomach. That every time the pickaxe hit bone, something inside her uncoiled. She said it wasn't about Jerry. It wasn't even about hate. It was about the release. The sound of the weapon connecting. The way it drowned out everything else. No more noise in her head. No more pain in her body. No more remembering her childhood or her mother or the men who didn't ask before touching her. Just the swing, the thud, and the quiet that came after. Danny had joined her by then. He grabbed the pickaxe, struck once, then handed it back like a teammate passing the ball to the star player. By the end, Jerry was barely recognizable. His jaw had collapsed. His teeth were scattered across the mattress. The walls looked like someone had flicked red paint across them by hand. His body twitched long after he was already gone. Karla stood over him, breathing hard, soaked in sweat and blood. Her shirt was clinging to her ribs. Her hands ached from the grip. And still, she smiled. That was the moment the robbery became something else. Not just a bad idea or a plan gone sideways. This wasn't about stealing anymore. It was about release. That's when they heard a sound, a voice from the hallway. Deborah Thornton had no idea what she was walking into. She'd been in the apartment only a few hours. She had argued with her husband earlier that night, packed a small overnight bag, and accepted Jerry Dean's offer to crash in the spare room. It was a romantic thing. Jerry was a friend. They'd worked together briefly. He told her she could stay as long as she needed. She was in her nightgown, light cotton, pale blue. Her hair still damp from a quick shower. She'd left the door cracked open, hoping the air would move, maybe catch some of the hallway breeze. But the apartment was still, thick with heat. No wind. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of a neon beer sign in the living room window. She was almost asleep when she heard it. A sound like something heavy dropping. Then a thud. Then another. Then laughter. She thought maybe Jerry had fallen. Maybe someone else was there, playing a joke, roughhousing. She didn't think danger. Not yet. She opened her door and stepped into the hallway. The first thing she saw was Jerry's bedroom light on. That was strange. He kept it dark whenever he needed to sleep. The door was wide open, and there was no movement inside, except for where she called out of her side of her eye. She called his name, quietly at first. Then she stepped closer. What she saw wasn't just blood. It was spatter. Across the walls, soaked into the sheets. And in the middle of the room, Karla, standing over Jerry with a pickaxe gripped in both hands, hair wild, face shining with sweat and something else. Satisfaction. Deborah froze. There was a moment, just one, where she could have turned and run. Back to the guest room, out the door, screamed for help. But Karla moved first. She turned, and when their eyes met, Deborah didn't see panic. She didn't see fear. She saw recognition. Like Karla had been waiting for her. She crossed the room fast, too fast for Deborah to scream. She backed into the hallway, trying to get away, but Karla followed, her bare feet slapping the floor. Deborah turned the corner toward the bathroom, maybe hoping to lock herself in. But Danny already behind her. Together, they pulled her to the floor. Deborah screamed now, loud, raw, real. But no one came. No neighbors knocked. The TV next door was still on. Someone was probably awake, but they didn't want to get involved. They pinned her down, Karla at the shoulders, Danny at the legs. She fought like hell, scratched, kicked. She begged. She told them her name, told them she had a family, just trying to search for any piece of humanity, any type of connection she could make with them. said she didn't see anything, wouldn't tell anyone, just let her go. But the begging only made Karla colder. She raised the pickaxe again. It came down into Deborah's chest, hard enough to crack a rib. Deborah shrieked. Danny reached for something else, a hammer on the floor, and drove it into her arm. They took turns, blow after blow. Chest, back, skull. Each hit carving away who Deborah had been. At one point, she went silent. Not dead, but defeated. Her arms stopped moving. Her head lolled to one side. Her mouth still open, like the scream just got stuck. Karla swung again. She said later that Deborah looked at her with eyes that didn't understand. Not pleading, not angry, just confused. And as if she were still trying to figure out what this was, why it was happening, and why Karla was smiling. By the time it was over, Deborah's body was unrecognizable. More than 30 separate wounds, defensive cuts on her arms, caved ribs, a fractured skull. The medical examiner later said that at least 20 of the blows came while she was still alive. They dragged her body into the other room, laid it next to Jerry. Two broken bodies in a room that smelled like copper, sweat, and gasoline. Karla stood over the both of them, breathing hard, covered in blood. And in that moment, she wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't sorry. She was quiet. Then she and Danny cleaned up, took Jerry's motorcycle keys, and walked out like they hadn't just turned an apartment into a grave. No remorse, no second thoughts, just adrenaline and the road ahead. The bodies were discovered the next afternoon. It was June 13th, 1983. And the temperature in Houston had already crossed 90 by midday. A coworker of Jerry's stopped by the apartment after he didn't show up for a scheduled delivery. He knocked. No answer. But the door was cracked just wide enough to see the edge of something red on the floor. When the police entered, the scene hit them like a wall. The air inside was heavy with blood, heat, and rot. Jerry Dean was lying in a bed, what was left of him. His head and shoulders collapsed inward from repeated blows. His teeth scattered like coins across the mattress. Next to the bed, curled awkwardly on the floor, was Deborah Thornton. She was still in her nightgown. Her legs were bent beneath her, her hands bruised, her face pulverized. There were more than 30 wounds on her body, delivered by both a pickaxe and a hammer. Many had been inflicted while she was still alive. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle outside the bedroom. Just blood everywhere. On the walls, the curtains, soaked through the mattress and into the floorboards. Whoever did this hadn't just killed. They had stayed. They had watched, and they had kept going. It didn't take long for the police to hear Karla's name. A confidential tip came in less than 48 hours later. Someone who'd seen her at a party wearing blood-stained clothes, bragging about what she'd done. We iced a couple of people. That was the phrase, repeated by multiple witnesses. She didn't say their names. She didn't have to. She talked about the acts, about the feeling, about how it wasn't scary. It was fun. Detectives tracked her down at a friend's apartment. She didn't run, didn't deny it. She sat cross-legged on the couch, her hair still wild, picking at the corner of a cigarette pack. When they asked her where she'd been the night of the murder, she said, "I was with Danny." When they asked what happened to Jerry Dean, she said, "I killed him." What followed was one of the most disturbing confessions in Texas legal history. Karla didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't seem confused. She described the night like someone recounting a weird dream, out of order, fragmented, but still vivid. She explained how they entered, how Jerry had been breathing funny when the axe hit his neck, how the blood smelled, how she kept swinging anyway. Then came the moment that would define her case forever. She leaned forward, hands in her lap, and said, "I had an orgasm every time I hit him." It wasn't planned. It just happened. The detectives paused. They didn't understand what they were hearing. Not just the confession, but the tone. There was no remorse, no fear, no shame. She wasn't detached. She was in it. Like she still hadn't quite left the room where it happened. They asked why she killed Deborah. Karla blinked, then said, "She walked in. I had to." Like it was math. Cause and effect. No emotion, no hesitation. She said she felt possessed, almost clean when it was happening. That the violence didn't scare her. It satisfied something inside her she didn't know she had. Meanwhile, Danny Garrett was picked up across town. His confession was colder, more deflective. He blamed the drugs, blamed Karla, said she was the one who liked it. But the evidence told its own story. Fingerprints on the pickaxe, blood-stained boots. A stolen motorcycle was recovered in his garage. Both were charged with capital murder. 2 counts each. Eligible for the death penalty. In jail, Karla didn't change. Not right away. She smiled at guards, cracked jokes with the other inmates, talked about her dreams, how she wanted to write a book, how she missed riding bikes. She signed autographs, told people she was famous now. She was 23 years old, sitting in a cell, and didn't seem to realize that Texas doesn't blink. Because Texas doesn't forget. By the time Karla Faye Tucker stood in trial in 1984, the courtroom was already full of ghosts. Jerry Dean and Deborah Thornton were gone. Their family sat in the gallery, eyes hollow, trying to understand how someone could not only kill, but enjoy it. Reporters packed into the benches with legal pads and sharpened pencils, waiting for the girl with the axe to show her face. And when she did, she smiled. Karla walked in with long brown hair, parted soft at the sides. Her eyes were wide, but not frightened. She wore no makeup, no tears. She looked young, younger than the crime. The prosecution didn't waste time. They showed photos, the crime scene, the pickaxe, the bruises, the confessions. They played her taped interview for the jury. The moment when she said she had an orgasm every time she struck Jerry Dean, when her voice didn't shake, when she spoke like someone still living inside that night. There was no plea deal, no insanity defense, no remorse visible to the 12 people who mattered most. Karla was convicted of 2 counts of capital murder and sentenced to death. At the time, it felt open and shut. She would sit on death row until her time came. Texas didn't execute women often, but when it didn't hesitate. But then, something changed. It didn't happen fast. It started with a Gideon Bible slipped through the bars of her cell. A quiet moment on a metal cot where she read the book of John with her knees tucked to her chest and the fluorescent lighting flickered overhead. She said she felt something break open inside her. Not guilt, not yet, but stillness. She started to write letters to pastors, to prison staff, to anyone who would listen. Not begging, not bargaining, just explaining. She said she was different, said she had been high for most of her life, said she didn't even recognize the person who had done those things anymore. She talked about God, about grace, about a soul reborn inside a body that had once been used up and thrown away. At first, no one believed her. Inmates convert all the time. Finding Jesus behind bars is practically a cliche. But Karla didn't preach. She practiced. She got clean, took classes, volunteered as a spiritual counselor to other women on death row. She didn't ask for special treatment, didn't seek the cameras, but they came anyway. By the late 1990s, Karla Faye Tucker had become a national name, not for the crime, but for what had come after. She gave interviews on Larry King Live, Dateline, and 60 Minutes. She spoke calmly, clearly, never denying what she had done, but always returning to what she believed she had become. Her voice was steady. She looked directly into the lens. She said, "I am so sorry. I hurt so many people, and I know it. I wake up with it. But I am not the same woman who picked up that axe. Not anymore." People started to believe her. Not just Christians or activists, but prosecutors, guards, even members of the parole board. Letters of support poured in from Europe, from clergy, from former skeptics who said they saw something in her they couldn't ignore. She was intelligent, humble, gentle. She seemed, by all accounts, genuine. But none of that changed the crime, and Texas doesn't forget. The victims' families didn't forget. Deborah Thornton's mother sat for her own interview and said, "She's talking about God now? But where was God when my daughter was begging for her life?" The divide widened. Some said Karla Faye Tucker was the perfect case for mercy, proof that people could change. Others said she was the worst case, proof that even monsters can wear soft faces. The question wasn't whether Karla was guilty. It was whether redemption matters when blood has already been spilled and when death is already on the calendar. It was early 1998, and Karla Faye Tucker had been sitting on death row for nearly 14 years. In that time, the world had changed. The headlines had moved on. The outrage had faded. But Karla hadn't disappeared. In fact, she'd become impossible to ignore. She wasn't the girl with the wild hair and hollow eyes anymore. She was a 38-year-old woman with clear skin, a steady voice, and a Bible in her lap. She led prayer groups in the women's unit. She counseled new inmates. She wrote to victims' families, even those who never responded. To many inside the system, she'd become a model prisoner. To many outside it, she'd become a symbol of change, of possibility, of the question we don't like to ask. What if someone who did something monstrous isn't a monster anymore? As her execution date approached, February 3rd, 1998, the pressure built. Her legal team filed for clemency with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, a last-ditch effort to commute her sentence from death to life in prison. They weren't asking for freedom, just mercy, just a chance to let her live out her days behind bars. They argued that Karla's transformation was not performative. It was authentic. That her rehabilitation was total. That killing her now wasn't justice. It was vengeance. And the world started paying attention. Religious leaders came forward, hundreds of them, across denominations. Catholic bishops, evangelicals, even Pope John Paul II, all pleading with the state to spare her. They said executing Karla would send the wrong message, that redemption doesn't matter, that grace has limits, that once you're damned, there's no coming back. Pat Robertson, the televangelist, known for his hardline views on sin and punishment, shocked the public when he said, "She is the real deal. If we believe in redemption, we cannot ignore this." Even some victims' advocates began to quietly support the commutation. Not because they had forgotten, but because they had watched her change. But the families of Jerry Dean and Deborah Thornton stood firm. Deborah's mother appeared on national television, visibly shaking, and said, "I think God has forgiven Karla. But it's not up to me, and it's not up to God. This is Texas, and she took my daughter. Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted unanimously 7-0. Clemency denied. That left just one man, Governor George W. Bush. He was on the edge of launching a presidential run. He had signed dozens of death warrants already. But Karla's case was different. It had become global. His office was flooded with faxes, calls, letters, emails. He read her file, watched her interviews, spoke with his advisors, and then he prayed. He later told reporters, "I went to my knees and asked the Lord what to do. And I got the answer that justice was being served." He refused to intervene. In the days that followed, Karla's execution date was locked in. She received her last meal, a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. On the night of February 3rd, she was escorted to the death chamber at the Huntsville unit. She wore prison whites, no makeup, her hair tied back neatly. She looked like someone preparing for church, not death. At 6:45 p.m., she was strapped to the gurney. Reporters, guards, and victims' families sat behind the glass. The room was silent, except for the low hiss of the IV drip waiting. When asked if she had any final words, Karla looked up, smiled. She said, "I love you all very much. I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now. I'll see you all when you get there." Then she closed her eyes, and the poison began to flow. It took 8 minutes. Her lips turned pale. Her breathing slowed. And at 6:45 p.m., Karla Faye Tucker, once the most hated woman in Texas, was declared dead. When Karla Faye Tucker died, she became the first woman executed in Texas since 1863. More than a century had passed. Dozens of women had sat on death row. All of them sentenced, none of them killed, until her. The response was immediate and divided. Some people cheered. They said justice had finally been served, that this wasn't about faith or gender or reform. This was about Deborah Thornton and Jerry Dean, two people who went to sleep in their own beds and never woke up. They pointed to the autopsy reports, to the interviews where Karla had smiled, to the line that no one could ever unhear. "I had an orgasm every time I hit him." They said that couldn't be forgiven. Others mourned, not because they'd forgotten what she did, but because they believed she had become someone else. A woman who no longer posed a threat. A woman who'd spent more than a decade helping others, counseling the broken, becoming the kind of person we say we want criminals to become. They said her execution sent the wrong message, that transformation doesn't matter, that faith is irrelevant, that death is death, even when a second life has already started inside the same body. Her death made international news, not because of the crime, but because of the question she left behind. If someone can be redeemed, why kill them? And if someone can't, Why pretend our justice system is about anything more than revenge? Jerry Dean's family never wavered. They said Karla's death gave them peace, finally. Deborah Thornton's family remained haunted. They said no apology, no prayer, no prison conversion could undo the final moments of Deborah's life. They remembered the screams, the blood, the brutality. Not the woman Karla said she had become. Karla Faye Tucker is buried in a modest cemetery just outside Huntsville, Texas. Her grave is quiet, clean, unmarked by flowers most of the year. Sometimes a note is left, a Bible verse, a name she once counseled, but mostly it's just grass and silence. Danny Garrett died in prison before he could be executed. Natural causes. No one remembers his last words. No one talks about his soul. What Karla left behind is harder to define. She became a symbol for hope. For others, hypocrisy. She became a cautionary tale, a conversation starter, a question with no clean answer. She didn't deny what she did. She didn't ask to be seen as a victim. She simply asked not to be killed for something she claimed she no longer was. Texas said no. And in that no, the country saw itself split between mercy and punishment, between justice and vengeance, between the law and the people it's written for. There are no pickaxe killers after Karla Faye Tucker. No other women have ever used that weapon the way she did. No one has ever said those words again, at least not in court. But she lingers. In conversations about the death penalty, in books, documentaries, sermons, in quiet, uneasy questions whispered after midnight. What if she was telling the truth? What if she really did change? What stuck with you in this one? Was it the confession? The quiet calm in her voice? The question no one could answer? Can someone kill like that and ever be forgiven? And what does justice even mean? When the person begging for mercy might have actually earned it. Leave a review on Apple or Castbox. Follow the show on Spotify or iHeart so you never miss one of our drops. And if this one left you quiet, send me a DM. There's a link in the episode's description. You are the quiet jury, and your verdict matters. On-air sources. State of Texas versus Karla Faye Tucker. Trial transcripts and sentencing documents. Karla Faye Tucker's taped confession. Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Interviews from CBS News, 60 Minutes, and Larry King Live. Texas Department of Criminal Justice execution records. Coverage from the Houston Chronicle, Texas Monthly, and BBC News. Personal testimony from victims' families and parole board members. Governor George W. Bush's public statements and clemency file. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious.